Hey, this is Corey from Woodcraft. Today we're going to be talking about winter camping. I recently got a question asking what I recommend for a winter tent. And honestly, I just use the tent that I have. When it comes to winter camping, what most people are most concerned about is freezing to death or hypothermia. And so to control your core body temperature, whether it's dead summer or the dead of winter, there's three factors that play into that. First one is conduction, convection, and radiation. And so conduction is touching something that's hot or cold. And so like if you're injured and you use a heat pad or an ice pack, you're taking something that's hot and you're conducting that heat into your body, or you're conducting the cold into your body. So you're physically touching something. That's conduction. Convection is when you're moving hot or cold air. And so the good example of this would be your vehicle. If you turn the heat on, it blows hot air into your vehicle, heating it up. If you turn the air conditioning on, it blows cold air into your vehicle. If you can hear the wind today, I'm battling convection right now making this video. It's robbing my body heat. My arms are getting a little chilly, but that's convection. It's moving hot or cold air. And then the last one is radiation, which is being next to something that's hot and cold. So the examples of this would be your fire or the frozen food section at your local grocery store. Everything around you is frozen, so you're cold. The fire is really hot, so you're warm. So those are the three ways that temperatures transfer or move. And so if you can control all three of those, you can control whether you are cooling down or heating up. And so for me, my tent is just used for convection. It's a wind block, it's a windshield, so that the wind isn't robbing my body heat. And so I use the Dominion 2-person tent. Before that, I had an Ozark Trail tent, and it was just a wind block. It was just a way for me to block the wind so that I wasn't fighting convection inside my shelter. Another thing that I think is really important is having a bathtub floor, because you don't want the melted snow and everything to seep through the bottom of your shelter. A lot of people think that having a Gore-Tex bivy will save you all your problems because it doesn't matter because you're going to be dry. But you have to worry about your gear inside that tent as well. And so a Gore-Tex bivy isn't always the answer. That bathtub floor that's going to keep the moisture from seeping through, that's the best way to go, because then you don't have to worry about your gear or your pack or anything inside your tent getting wet and freezing either. And so those are the only two requirements, and a lot of tents that people have meet those requirements. If you trust it in a downpour thunderstorm, it'll probably do all right in the winter. I'm not sure what you own, so don't hold me to that, but that's all I've ever done, is I've just used the tent that I've always used. The next one is conduction. And so if you're going to be spending the money, I highly recommend buying a sleeping pad. A lot of people, they have a high quality sleeping bag and then they buy this cheap sleeping pad that they just found or that they got at Walmart. And that's one of the best ways of keeping warm, is having a good sleeping pad. Something to keep the cold earth, the frozen earth on one side and the warm you on the other. You don't want the warmth seeping through, because that's going to rob your body heat. It's taking your body heat away, and you don't want that frozen earth seeping through and cooling you down either. You want a nice, thick, good barrier between the two so that nothing is being transferred back and forth. What I use the Thermarest X-Therm. I really like that sleeping pad because it allows me to reflect my body heat back at me, which makes it feel a lot warmer than it actually is. I also have used the T&H Outdoors self-inflating sleeping pad, and it worked. It kept the cold and me separated, but there was nothing reflecting, so it didn't feel warm. It didn't feel cold, it was just kind of neutral. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. The self-inflating sleeping pad is only a quarter of the price. So depending on how much you're willing to spend, just make sure that you're getting a really high R value. The higher the R value, the better it's gonna be at separating you from the frozen earth. And so that's what I have to say about that. Sleeping bag, when it comes to radiation, your sleeping bag is what's gonna do that for you. It's not providing heat. The only thing that's radiating heat in your tent is probably gonna be you. And so you need to trap all that heat that you're producing, and that's what your sleeping bag's for. So you wanna make sure that you get a high quality sleeping bag. I suggest getting the best sleeping bag that you can afford. But you have to be careful. Just because a sleeping bag is expensive doesn't mean that it's gonna be comfortable. It doesn't mean that it's gonna be warm. There's a lot of sleeping bags that are $300-400 because they fit into a softball sized bag. They're not warm, they're not comfortable, but they're small and compact. There's other sleeping bags that have a lot of features to them. The zipper that zips all the way open, or two can zip together or whatever, and they're expensive because of the features. There are sleeping bags that are expensive because they are warm. There's sleeping bags that are expensive because they're modular. They can be used in different climates. So make sure that you're getting a sleeping bag that is catered to exactly what you are looking for. Don't think that you're just going to spend top dollar and get something that's comfortable. There's a lot of sleeping bags that are really expensive that are not comfortable. And so another thing to keep in mind is the weather temperature of that sleeping bag isn't always the same. I know that they're starting to regulate it now, but if you're buying a used or an older model sleeping bag, you can have a sleeping bag that's rated for 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and that just means that you are not going to die if it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to be cold, you're going to be miserable, but you're not going to die. And then you can have another sleeping bag from another company that's rated at that same 0 degrees, and that's a comfort rating. Meaning if it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you will sleep like a baby. You won't be cold, you'll be completely comfortable. And so you want to make sure that you know the difference between the extreme rating and the comfort rating. I like to have a sleeping bag where the comfort rating is 10 degrees less than what's predicted, what's forecasted. Because predicted weather can easily be 5-10 degrees warmer than actual weather, okay? And so I like my sleeping bags, the comfort rating, to be 10 degrees colder. So if it's predicted to be 30 degrees Fahrenheit, I want a 20 degree Fahrenheit bag. That way, if the temperatures do drop, if the predictions were wrong, I'm still fine. If the temperatures drop below 20 degrees, I know that I can just layer up and still be comfortable. And it's gonna take a severe temperature drop for me to have to even worry about it. So I like that 10 degree mark. It seems to work for me. I know there's some people that are colder sleepers. There are some people that are warmer sleep warm or sleep cold. So make sure that you find that sweet spot. Just because it says it's comfortable at a certain temperature doesn't mean that you specifically are going to be comfortable at that temperature. Another thing is when you're buying your sleeping bag, remember that if you're using it for winter, you're going to have a lot of junk in your bag with you. You're going to have either your alcohol stove to help keep your alcohol warm. You're going to have a bottle of alcohol, keep that warm. You're probably going to have a water bottle full of water in there with you to make sure it doesn't freeze. So knowing what kind of container you're going to use for your alcohol or your stove system, make sure that you know that and you're aware of that, so that you know that all this stuff, your headlamp, your phone, anything with a battery is going to be in that sleeping bag with you, because you don't want it to freeze. And so you want to make sure you have room for all that extra equipment and all that extra gear, because yeah, it's going to be in there with you. Whether you like it or not, whether it's comfortable or not, you're going to need it in there with you so that you can use it when you wake up. Cold really drains batteries quick, faster than you can imagine sometimes. And so you got to make sure that that headlamp and that phone are in that sleeping bag with you so that you can use them in case of an emergency, and you have them and they're ready to go. The last thing you want is dead batteries when it's cold out and you're freezing. So keep that in mind when you're buying a sleeping bag. Try to get the best that you can afford and do your research. I use a MMSS, but there's a lot of great bags out there. There's a lot of different options. There's more and more new technologies being introduced all the time. So do your research. Getting back to the tent, since it was a tent question, something that I wanted to bring up is I use shepherd hook tent pegs in the spring, summer, fall. They're just thin titanium shepherd hooks. In the winter, the ground is going to be frozen, and so these will bend and break, and they're not fun getting in and out of the cold ground. And so I just have a dry bag full of these larger stakes. These are like 97 cents a piece at Walmart. And I like these because I can use my axe, the hammer end of my axe, pound these in the ground. I can use a rock. I can use a hammer if I pack a hammer. And the advantage of these is they're not going to break, they're not going to bend. You can really pound on them even when the ground is solid ice. They work really, really well. The advice that I have is never hammer them more than halfway through. There's a lot of people that worry about winter storms, and I don't know if it's just my environment. I don't know if I'm naive in this, but in the summer, when the thunderstorms come through, it is extremely windy. It's extremely harsh wind. Same in the winter. It's exactly the same. A winter storm and a summer storm, the one means rain and the other means snow, but the wind is the same. So I don't see the point in driving this whole thing into the ground. Another disadvantage is if this freezes into the ground, which it typically does, getting it out is a pain. And so I only hammer it in halfway. So if I compare it to my shepherd hook, it's still only about half. And so if I trust this in a thunderstorm, half of this should be more than enough in a winter storm. The snow blowing is going to drift around the tent. It's not going to plow into it. The wind is going to be the same wind that was around in the summer. And so having it halfway into the ground allows me a lot more to hold on to pull it out. Also, if it is frozen into the ground, I can hammer it in. So I just hammer it in a little bit deeper. That breaks up all the ice, that breaks up the ground a little bit, making it easier to pull out. I like these because I don't use the plastic thing. So there's orange, there's green. I don't really use the plastic thing at all. I just angle them to hold everything down. But these ones also have a head to them. And so I like that because what I can do is I can use not the needle nose, but the standard pliers on my Leatherman, and I can wrap around it, and I can use that as kind of leverage to really crank this thing out of the ground. And yeah, that's my advice. Halfway. That's the one thing that I want to really emphasize. Being able to hammer this thing in a little bit deeper, it makes it way easier to pull out, especially when it's frozen into the ground. Just being able to tap it with your rock, axe, whatever you brought, tap it in a little bit, it comes out way easier. Another thing that I want to mention is I bring just paracord, these little strands of paracord, and what I do is I take these and I wrap them around the tie outs of my tent or my tarp, depending on what I'm doing. And the reason that I use these is I'll just tie these around the pegs, and so then my stakes, so my tie outs on my tarp or my tent, I put paracord around there, and then I use my tent peg through this instead of my tent. That way, if this is frozen into the ground and I'm having a hard time getting it out, I can either untie this, or I can cut it. I can just cut it off and then get my tent away from the tent peg, and I can just do whatever I want to this, and I don't have to damage my tent. There's been times when I first started where I just sent the stake through the loops of my tent, and it was, not having to be careful is the advantage to this right here. There have been times where I thought about just cutting my tarp or my tent loose and just buying another one, but the paracord, it's cheap, it's easily replaced, and it's way better to damage this than your tent. And getting your tent out of the way usually helps get these out a lot faster and easier as well too. So those are little tips and tricks that I've learned over the years of winter camping. I don't do it all the time, but I do it enough to know some of these little things that I wanted to share with you. So hopefully it helped you. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section down below. I'll try to do a video answering those questions in a future video. And there's going to be a video popping up right here that YouTube thinks you're interested in. So hopefully I'll see you on that next video.